Good afternoon. Thank you again all for coming to Impact Maryland. We're getting ready for our final conversation of the afternoon, so thanks for hanging with us all afternoon. Again, I am Pamela Wood. I am a government and politics reporter at the Baltimore Banner, and I'm back on stage to introduce our final conversation. Now, when we started planning for Impact Maryland, it was obvious who should be a choice for this coveted slot at the end, and that is your Governor, Wes Moore. Now, politics and government is an important part of what we do at the Baltimore Banner. We think that we can make a difference by watching our government leaders, seeing how they flex their power, how it affects all of us, and holding them accountable for those decisions. Now, when the Banner launched last June, it was right as the Democratic primary for governor was speeding towards the election, and it became clear that Wes Moore was one of the frontrunners. And we covered that election all the way through his historic election as the state's first Black governor. And when it came time for the inauguration in January, the Banner, we even forgot our digital roots for a minute there, and we printed a commemorative keepsake print edition of the Baltimore Banner. And for any of you, side note, who travel through Annapolis, I have a bunch of copies in the State House press room, so stop by and I'll give you one. Since the governor took office, we have followed him through his first legislative session where he talked about economic issues. And then, of course, we have followed the story of the summer and the fall, which is the lease negotiations for the Orioles at Camden Yards. Now, when the Baltimore Banner is interviewing the governor, it's usually me or my colleague Brenda Wintrode, but we're giving him a break from us for today. Instead, we have a really fantastic person lined up to be the interviewer. We are proud to welcome Brian Stelter, who is a media reporter and author. He got his start, he's a Marylander, got his start right here at Towson University, reporting on media while he was still a student. He later went on to the New York Times, and you probably know him from his years hosting reliable sources on CNN. He's currently a special correspondent for Vanity Fair, and he has a new book coming out next month that I'm sure he'd be happy if you bought. It's called Network of Lies. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to Impact Maryland, Brian Stelter and Governor Wes Moore.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hey, guys.
Okay. In this beautiful venue, I was going to start by showing off my Towson pride, my Towson colors, and brag about my Maryland roots. And Governor, we could do that all day.
Yes, we can.
But I think given the sickening headlines out of the Middle East and what you spent a lot of your day today dealing with, the foreign policy agenda of the state of Maryland, tell us what responsibility the U.S. has right now with regards to what's happening in Israel and Gaza.
Well, you know, I think about the fact that, you know, I've spent a significant amount of time, not just today, but for the past couple days, more time spending on foreign policy and its response to it than most people think that a governor would have to do. And partially it's because Maryland is such a remarkably diverse state. You know, we're a state that literally represents almost every country around the world has residents living in the state of Maryland, and you're looking at the atrocity of what happened and the terrorism that Hamas displayed and the humanity they displayed. This has direct impact on many Marylanders, where we're spending our time now helping Marylanders try to identify where colleagues and family members are and try to get them out of Israel at the time. And so you realize that that this is something that we're not separated from. It's not exclusively something that's happening over there, where we've spent time over these past days meeting with ministers and imams and rabbis and helping them to make sure that their homes of worship are fortified. And so the damage that you see by these kind of actions and the barbarity of what we saw. And with every single hour, it feels like there's more and more details that are coming out. And with every new round of details, it's worse of what happened. And so, I think as a state, we don't just have a collective responsibility to make sure that we are doing everything in our power to be able to support the victims and their families. We're very clear that we as a state we know that we both stand with Israel, we support our Palestinian brothers and sisters, and we are going to condemn the actions and the acts of Hamas to no end, because terrorism has no home, and what happened has no grounding, and needs to be addressed and needs to be dealt with. And so it's been a long few days, even from the perspective of a governor.
In my
not just the headquarters of an NAACP, but also for the Baltimore branch of the NAACP, have to deal with an issue of fire and arson. I mean, these are real things, and so I think for a lot of people, this is not something that serves as a distant problem. The reason that we have to stay intense and the reason that we have to stay diligent and be on our front foot forward and put our front foot forward is because this is all very personal for us.
And you mentioned those two shootings recently at those two campuses. What happens when you get a phone call that tells you there's been yet another shooting, yet another family suffering? Do you feel like you and the state are failing?
It's something that it was impossible for people to prepare you for. There was a lot of things that people could prepare you for when you took on the role of governor. How to think about budgetary issues, how to think about your departments, and even for someone who, I've been a chief executive for a good portion of my life. I'd never run for public office. This is my first elected office that I decided to run for, and I decided to run for governor. But it's the call at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. That you get when people saying, sorry to wake you, but I got to update you on something. It's the fact that you now know that for days after, your day is going to have to get shifted around because you now have a call list. And your call list includes the families of victims. Your call list includes people who were directly impacted. That you thought you were doing something on one day, but now instead, I have to go visit shock trauma. It's that kind of thing that is, it's impossible for people to prepare you for the emotional weight that takes on, and you can't, and I don't separate it. But it's also the type of thing that is infuriating because I'm doing too much of it.
I get angry when I read these stories.
I mean, I have, when people ask, what are some of the things that surprised you over the past 9 months? It's amazing how much this first period has been dominated by two words: guns and violence. Guns and violence.
And does that make you feel powerful when you're on the phone, when you're going to the hospital, or does it make you feel powerless because you're limited in what you can do about all these guns that we're washed in?
We're not powerless.
No.
And so the thing that I think we have to approach, and very much we do approach, is the reason that I say we have to take an all of the above approach on the way we're dealing with this is I just refuse, absolutely refuse, to be a person who is going to do 2 terms in this seat and spend my entire time attending funerals and tweeting out thoughts and prayers and not passing a single piece of legislation, without making any forms of adjustments in the way that we do our work, without trying to infuse a new spirit and a new empathy and a new humanity in the way that our society responds to each other. And so the reason that we have been so aggressive when it comes to our first months and the ways we're dealing with. And when I say aggressive, and that includes everything from putting some of the most aggressive policies put forward to do things like getting and keeping these illegal guns and these ghost guns out of our streets and out of our neighborhoods, when you consider the fact that 65% of firearms that are recovered in the city of Baltimore, it's not that they're not even coming from they're not coming from Baltimore, they're not coming from Maryland. They're being trafficked in, right? The reason that we have focused on things like, putting over $100 million towards behavioral health, when you consider the fact that 70% of all 911 calls actually have some form of behavioral health connection to it. right? The reason that we've done record investments of over $122 million into local law enforcement, $17.5 million into Baltimore City alone, because we have to be able to attract and recruit and retain and properly train law enforcement officers who are going to be in our communities, yet at the same time also say we're going to make record investment in our public education system, because we're not just going to create a funnel for people that law enforcement then have to deal with a larger problem, because we're not dealing with the problem on the front end. Right? So this has to be a way that when we say an all of the above approach, I refuse to be powerless. I refuse to just sit back and say, well, this is the way society works. That's not the way society works. It's the way we've allowed it to work.
But will recent reforms regarding juvenile crime be revisited in Annapolis in January?
They will. They will.
And how should they be specifically?
Well, I think there's a few things that we have to do. And one, we work in partnership with the legislature, because I know so many of the legislative items that we're talking about are pieces of legislation that was passed before I arrived. But there has to be two things that are going to happen simultaneously. One is we need to make sure we have a legislative framework that knows that there needs to be accountability for individuals, particularly for individuals who are repeatedly violating laws and repeat violent offenders. The challenge that we are seeing is that for some individuals, it's not just that they are committing these crimes. It's that they'll also be back out. Without any forms of accountability. There needs to be greater measures of accountability. We also need to make sure that we're strengthening DJS, our Department of Juvenile Services, so there's actually services for these young people as well, because we're not just going to arrest or criminalize our way out of something that is a much larger challenge. The third piece, when we talk about forms of adjustments, is how then are we thinking about not just that accountability piece, but also the education piece, so we're not actually creating these funnels. If you look at the juvenile justice system within our state, there's a couple things that you notice. One, if you look at the criminal justice system, oftentimes these are young people who have now just gotten older, right? The second piece you notice is this: what you don't find, and where the juvenile justice system actually ends up becoming, when people talk about there's a break in the juvenile justice system, for many of our young people, that's the last system that broke. It's not the first.
That relates to ending childhood poverty.
That directly relates to ending child poverty.
I was setting you up there. That was a softball.
No, that's right. And it's the reason why, as part of our inaugural and part of, very first State of the State, that I said that we were going to have the most aggressive and bipartisan assault on child poverty that this state has ever seen. And so when people talk about, well, what's happening around criminal justice, my answer is, you can point towards what we've done around ghost guns. You can point towards the funding that we've given towards local law enforcement. You can point towards, the many different areas that we've done to be able to address the issue of access to firearms. Right? The fact that right now in the state of Maryland, because of laws that we passed and laws that I signed, we've done things like saying that we've raised the age to 21 for people to be able to purchase a firearm, because there's no reason for a 17-year-old to get their hands on a weapon. There's no reason for someone who has a history of mental health illness and a history of violence to be able to purchase a firearm, right? But at the same time, what we've also done is this. We've raised the minimum wage to $15. We've now made the child tax credit permanent. We've now enhanced an earned income tax credit. What that has done, that has lifted over 156,000 children up a rung on the economic ladder. If you provide opportunity for people, you will provide them a chance to think about something different. And when you have a hopeless community, you will have a violent community. And so you have to be able to address both these two things simultaneously.
We are here today all day talking about growing the economy, about growing the profile of the state, and specifically of Baltimore. So here in Baltimore, when it comes to the economy, what specifically can you do to drive more private investment?
In Baltimore specifically?
In Baltimore, yeah.
So one is, we have to remember, there's a reason that I'm very bullish on Baltimore, and that we spend a lot of time and a lot of focus on Baltimore. And people say, yeah, it's because you're a homer. It's because you're a Baltimorean. No, it's because I'm very good at math. We're the state's largest city. Name me a single state in this country that is clicking on all cylinders, yet the state's largest city is not.
Right.
The answer is there is none, and I've done the data. In order for this to be Maryland's decade, it must be Baltimore's time. And so the reason that we are unapologetic as an administration, that we are going to focus on economic growth in Baltimore, it's because it's going to help provide the economic push and the economic engine that the entire state of Maryland is going to need. So for example, just earlier today, where I was at the biotech hub over the University of UMB, the University of Maryland. This is, biotech as an industry alone creates about $20 billion of economic activity.
But so much of it goes to Massachusetts. How do we keep it here?
By being intentional. Do you know why Massachusetts became the biotech hub of the country? It's because about 25 years ago, they had a governor named Deval Patrick. And Deval Patrick said, you know what, this is the home of Harvard. This is the home of MIT. Why are we not the biotech capital of the country? And they made strategic investments in order to do that. Now, what is the biotech capital of this country? Massachusetts. Why is Kentucky the leading hub in this country for EV battery technology? It's not because Kentucky is something unique when it comes to EV battery technology. They made a deliberate choice to invest in it. And now they are leading the country. The challenge of our state, honestly, is that we are asset rich and we're strategy poor. Where we have tremendous assets in the state of Maryland, tremendous assets here in the city of Baltimore. But do we invest that way?
So when and where is the rich new strategy going to come?
Oh, it's already begun.
Okay.
And I'm excited about it because if you look at what's happened just over the past 9 months, right? And I can talk about more, but again, I've been governor for 9 months. But let's talk about what's happened over the past 9 months. When I first took over as governor, Maryland was ranked 47th in economic momentum. 47th. If you look at the economy for the state of Maryland, the economy of the state of Maryland essentially hasn't grown over the past 5 years. Maryland has grown by 0.2%. Every other state around this country, on average, they have grown by 7.5% over the same period of time. 7.5%, 0.2. That's why we're ranked 47th. If you look at what's happened over the past 9 months on the same grading criteria, we have now jumped in 9 months, now jumped 20 slots in terms of economic momentum. Maryland now has the lowest unemployment rate in the entire country. We've gone on 5 straight months of historically low unemployment. Just today, I announced that Con Air has just announced another 700 jobs that's taken place in Western Maryland. We've now announced over 31,000 jobs since I took over as governor. What we are doing, there has to be a measure of intentionality. There has to be a measure of focus. We have to be very clear that, like I said, I love these other governors and I think they're wonderful people, but I'm going after all of their businesses. I'm going after all of them because we know if you look at the businesses that we have a unique opportunity to be able to build in and grow in. Take everything from the fact that this should be the capital of quantum, right? IonQ is the largest quantum company inside the country. This should be the capital of quantum. When you're looking at basic facets like life sciences, biotech, biopharma, edtech, Baltimore City has one of the most thriving technology and edtech communities in the entire country.
So what's the pushback you get from CEOs? One answer must be about crime. What pushback do you get?
Well, I think, it's interesting because I think a lot of times people talk about, the economic competitiveness and taxes and all this kind of stuff. And I do think there are certain things that we can and we are addressing when it comes to that. So, for example, you look at how we have shown as an administration, we are going to be bold. And we're going to be unapologetic about that. But at the same time, we're going to be fiscally responsible and make sure we're doing things that is going to protect the taxpayer dollars. But we also know that, to your point, that's not all CEOs are talking about. They will ask questions like, tell us about public safety. They'll ask questions like, tell us about public transportation. And it's one of the reasons why, when we said, despite the fact that we know, in the prior administration, it was killed, and we came on very clear and said, oh no, we are going to get the red line done, and we're going to get it done in our time. But that wasn't just because of the transportation argument. And it wasn't just because of the environmental argument. It's the economic argument. You cannot have economic mobility if you do not have physical mobility.
So what year can I ride the red line?
What time's your train?
What about the argument that in a work from home, we're in a new hybrid work era, that you're going to have to rethink what public transport actually makes sense and what doesn't?
Oh, we are, but I think that's part of the process we're going through right now with the red line, right? Okay. I think part of the whole point of the community conversations is we want to be able to have community engagement and community feedback about what type of shape and frame do they want this to look like. The one thing that I'm very clear on, though, is it's going to get done.
In what year? So what year can I ride? What year can we ride?
My expectation is before I'm complete being the governor.
That's what I heard you say.
We'll be able to do some. We'll be able to do some rides together. But I will say though, it is important to make sure that there is real measurements of community involvement when it comes to getting this right.
Orioles, the MOU, the lease that wasn't a lease. What do you say to your critics who say you oversold the deal because you wanted to be there for the big game?
Well, let's be clear.
It looked awesome.
I've probably been to 20-something game. I was going to be at that game no matter what. Let's be clear.
I know you were.
But here's the thing.
Do they just not know how it works? This is how it normally works in the industry?
Well, I mean, it is true. I mean, MOUs are commonplace in major deals, particularly when you're talking about multi-decade, and when this is going to turn out to be multi-billion-dollar deals. MOUs are not just commonplace. MOUs in many cases are prerequisites. Okay. So that is true. But I want to be clear about what that is and what the MOU is. This is saying, and it is stating and locking in the fact that the Orioles are going to be here for 30 plus years. Yeah. Because I was very clear, I'm not interested in a short-term deal. Not for the Orioles. That what this deal does, it states the fact that we're going to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars, because I was very, very clear on the idea that making sure that we were going to add value to this was going to be important. And the third piece was this. This is bigger than baseball.
Why?
Because this is not just about whether Orioles are going to be playing for the next 30 years, which will be in Baltimore and will bring multiple World Series championships. But what this deal says is this. What this deal says is this. And I want people to hear me on this. That if at the end of the day, all we got was a baseball team that's playing in an area that is not developed and not growing, we blew it. We blew it. That we have a generational opportunity to get this right. That we have a generational opportunity to rethink Baltimore, to rethink the downtown corridor. That we have a generational opportunity to talk about what does it mean to not just create winners on the field, but create winners off of the field. And if you look at the framework that we've laid out, the reason that I'm not just incredibly thankful to Craig Thompson and the Maryland Stadium Authority, who have done a spectacular job in getting us to this point, but the reason that I'm so proud of the conclusion and what this is going to lay out is it doesn't just mean that with this deal, we're going to have the Orioles for 30 plus years. It means we now have a chance to say, what does it mean to envision the future of our city? And this becomes a core catalyst of this. So I'm incredibly excited and incredibly proud of the work that's been done, and I'm excited to be able to get to work.
And the pavilions are going to be coming down in the harbor. What do you think, what should the downtown be, again, in a hybrid work from home, sort of in a post-COVID where people aren't working the same way they did 5 years ago?
Well, there needs to be an idea where people have an opportunity to live and visit and shop and thrive inside of a basic downtown corridor. And what you're looking at, this actually follows models that really collect with best practices that are taking place around the country. St. Louis, Philadelphia, Dallas, right? Atlanta, where you have mechanisms where people can know they can create entire experiences.
Right.
Where a person comes in and says, okay, I'm going to a conference at a convention center, but while I'm here, I'm going to go to a ball game.
Right.
And while I'm there, I'm going to stay at that hotel. And while I'm here, I'm going to go eat at a couple of these different restaurants. And while I'm here, I'm going to go shop and go to these different stores that are around here. And by the way, on all those things, you're attending places and you're shopping in places where we have a keen and a core eye on things like minority business enterprises, women business enterprises, veteran business enterprises. So there's going to be economic growth that's going to come from the ground and build up. An economic growth that everyone can benefit from. Instead of just simply saying, well, let's put money into a fan experience. That's not enough. And so we were very clear that those three metrics and those three guidelines was what I determined to be success. Just getting them to sign for a short-term deal, that's not success, that's failure. A long-term deal showing we're true stewards of taxpayer dollars that creates winners on and off the field. That's a successful deal, and that's what we've got.
One of the questions from the Baltimore Banner team, we were talking about you rebuilding the state government left with 10,000 state employee vacancies. When you took office, you said you'd cut it in half by January. How far along are you?
We're very close.
We're almost at the 5,000.
We're feeling very good about the progress that we've made. But I think the other thing I know is this, is as we've continued to fill these vacancies, and let's be clear, I mean, these vacancies are staggering. Literally walked in with 10,000 vacancies in state government, 6,100 vacancies in the executive branch alone. And people say, well, what does that mean? Yeah. What it means is that basic services weren't being provided. Do people wonder why it was taking some people upwards of 18 months to get unemployment insurance? Maybe because there was no one there actually doing the work.
Right.
When people talk about, you want to talk about public safety, how about the fact that we were down hundreds of parole and probation officers? How about the fact that you have, not just on the state side, but local law enforcement, where you have in Baltimore City alone, down, 600, 700 officers? So these vacancies have consequences. Right. And a lazy frame of being able to approach government and governance has consequences. So we've been very intentional about our ability to not just equip state government with, I'm so impressed with the talent of people who have raised their hand to serve in state government, to be able to fill vacancies, but it's also not just about, I'm not interested in just rebuilding someone else's government. I'm interested in actually reimagining how you can make government work for people again. And use systems, use technologies, use other frameworks that can make sure that when a person has a basic need that state government should be supporting, that they are getting the support.
Give us a tangible. Give us a tangible for that.
So, for example, you look at how people will approach food stamps, WIC, right? Where part of the challenge you have with people when it comes to the basic collection of supports that they financially deserve, right? And they financially need, that it becomes an incredibly onerous process for an individual to be able to get those levels of supports. But if you look at the work that's right now happening with the Department of Human Services, led by Secretary Raphael, and also the work from the Department of Health, where it's now coming up with a single collection spot where a person who oftentimes, where their financial situation justifies a different set of supports, they have to go through multiple different mechanisms in order to qualify and multiple different mechanisms in being able to receive. We have been able to, in the past 9 months, help to streamline that process to make sure that people are getting the supports that they need and the supports that their financial situation merits. So it's just one example.
But I think when you think about the tremendous distrust people feel in institutions, the fact that government doesn't work for them, you're talking about tangible reasons why they feel that way if the employee base has been so eroded. How can leaders like you and the leaders in this room re-engage frayed civic bonds?
Well, it's interesting because when I hear people say that that there are systems that don't work, my answer to them oftentimes is I know. Because throughout my life, I've seen it. My life has been littered with this idea that I've watched in front of my eyes how systems haven't worked for my family. And I've watched in front of my eyes how the opportunities that I have had, oftentimes a prerequisite for those opportunities have been luck. And luck should not be a prerequisite to success. So, when I think about the fraying of our society and the basic breakdown that we've had of dialogue, of conversation, of humanity, part of the reason that when we came on board and I made a theme for my very first State of the State, that service will save us, is I'm a big believer that we have to be a state that gets to know each other again. We need to be people that actually talk and communicate and serve together. Where I know I saw it when I was, I was a paratrooper with the United States Army with the 82nd Airborne Division. I had people who I served with in Afghanistan who came and campaigned for me when I was running for governor. Many of them were not Marylanders. Many of them were not Democrats. But they came to door knock on my behalf because they were simply like, let me tell you about the guy that I served with. Because service is sticky. And so part of the reason that we are asking people to serve, and not just in state government, even though I want people to keep signing up for state government, but to serve with your local nonprofits, to serve with community organizations, to do things like what we passed, where one of the first bills that we introduced that I testified on behalf of, and I was very proud to sign, was something called the SERVE Act, where Maryland is now the first state in this country that has a service year option for our high school graduates. So our high school graduates, when they complete high school, they now have an opportunity to serve the state of Maryland. And they can choose however they want to do it. They can do it in the environment, they can do it in education, they can serve veterans, they can serve older adults. It's their choice. And we're doing it because I'm a big believer in experiential learning, giving young people a pathway and let them experience things. And they can then figure out what it is they want to do that makes their heart beat faster. The second piece, I'm a believer in the idea of an earned financial cushion. And the third piece is this, is that service is the core part of our societal healing. Service is going to save us. And so I was really proud of the work that we did in partnership with the Maryland General Assembly and the leadership they took on this. But Maryland is now leading the charge on service. And while Maryland is now the first state in the country to have a service year option, my guarantee you is this, we will not be the last.
Speaking of young people, a lot of young people are sick and tired of the gerontocracy of American politics. So, you're a darling of your party right now. You're basically half the age of the president. What's your argument for re-electing an 80-year-old Democratic president?
Because performance matters. I mean, you know, I have to. So, I tell people, think about what's happened in our first 9 months, right? Where, you know, as I mentioned, we have now announced over 31,000 jobs in the state of Maryland, making it now the state with the lowest unemployment rate in the entire country, to include things like the Frederick Douglass Tunnel, that is going to not just increase rail and capacity, but also increase speed and do it in an environmentally friendly way. We've now announced that, you know, I made a campaign pledge that by the end of my first term, I want everybody in this state wired with internet and broadband access everywhere from Western Maryland to the Eastern Shore, from Oakland to Ocean City. And we now have $267 million that's going towards making that a reality. By the end of our first term, we're going to have this done. That we've said we want Maryland to be the offshore wind capital of this country, where in our first month, I announced that we were quadrupling our goal for offshore wind, going to 8.5 gigawatts, which is going to be enough to power over 3 million homes in the state of Maryland, turning Maryland into a net exporter of clean energy instead of being a net importer of clean energy, which we are right now, right? Do you know the reality of all of those things? Without the Biden-Harris administration, none of those things are possible. Tell me how you accomplish the offshore wind goals that we laid out without the IRA. Tell me how you accomplish everything from the Frederick Douglass Tunnel to what we're getting done with the Red Line. Tell me how you do that without the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act.
All right. So that's the Democratic argument. Can we talk about the Republicans for 2 minutes?
I think it's the Republican. I think it's the American argument. I mean, like, you know, if you care about results, and the reason, and I tell people all the time, I'm like, listen, this is what we have gotten done in 9 months. Imagine if you give me another 4 years. Imagine where Maryland is going to be if you give me another 4 years. And so the reason that I am aggressively supportive of this administration, and I want to make sure that they win re-election, it's about much more than just the idea of that, you know, democracy is on the line, which is all true, let's be clear. But I'm not excited about another 4 years of the Biden administration because of a fear of the alternative. I'm excited about another 4 years because I know what the positive is. And I know what the future can hold if we can just get more time to continue to build with this administration.
So I have 3 minutes left. I watched a recent speech at Morehouse College talking about defending history, rejecting book bans. Sounded like it was aimed at one Ron DeSantis. Do you feel like you are in a kind of battle of the states? You know, you've got Newsom versus DeSantis on Fox next month. Do you feel like you're trying to show what the Maryland model can be up against some of these red states that are pulling back on you know, the basic values that we thought were normal, like having books in schools?
Yeah, I'm not worried about beating Florida. You know, we'll beat Florida all day long.
Okay. But do you feel like you're in a competition of states like that? You're trying to show the Maryland model?
Well, I think that I don't look at it as a battle of states. I look at it as if Maryland shows what we do, the rest of the country will have no choice but to follow, right? I believe in our state. I believe in our people. I believe in our values. And I believe we're just going to go faster than everybody else. But I will say this about the idea of the book banning and why I decided to speak out about it, is when I hear people talk about banning books and banning what you can read, and I hear the argument that people make when they say, well, we're doing it because we don't want people to feel bad. We're doing it because we don't want people to feel discomfort.
Feel guilty.
Feel guilty. That's just not true. They're not doing it because they don't want people to feel bad. They're doing it because they don't want all people to understand their power.
Their power.
Their power. Do you know why? I mean, I walk around, in every room I walk into, I walk with my head up and my shoulders back because I know I come from the legacy of Frederick Douglass. I come from the legacy of Harriet Tubman. I come from the legacy of Thurgood Marshall. You can't minimize me because I know my history. I know my strength and I know my power. And if we all come to a point where we can embrace our collective history, if we come to a place where we can embrace our collective strength, the reason that I am excited about a future is because I know my past. And I think about where you know, on inauguration morning, I decided to start the inauguration down at the Annapolis docks. And I didn't do it just because it's beautiful. I did it because the Annapolis docks was one of this country's oldest and largest slave ports. And myself and a few hundred other people, some of whom were in the room, we did a wreath laying at the Annapolis docks, and then we marched from the docks to the State House, where I was inaugurated as the 63rd governor of the state and the first black governor in the history of the state of Maryland. And I remember as soon as we did that, the attacks started coming. And people say, well, he's starting his inauguration with indoctrination. It's not indoctrination. It's history. If we can collectively embrace our history, all of it, the unevenness of it, flaws and all, we're going to have a better understanding and a better embrace of our collective journey. That journey, that march, was not done to make people feel bad. It was done to make our state feel empowered. And so the thing that I would just challenge for anyone who thinks that somehow telling me what I should learn or what's worthy of knowledge, you're not just disrespecting a reality of a now. You're disrespecting the power of a past. And that's something that we have to aggressively push back against.
We started talking about the worst surprises of your governorship, what it's like to get those middle of the night phone calls. What's been the best surprise? Is it the O's box? Is it the governor's box at the games? What's the best upside you weren't expecting, you were anticipating about being the gov?
Being the gov. It's difficult for me to talk about the best because I got to tell you, there is no one who loves their job more than me, man. I mean, I tell our team all the time, who's got it better than us? I think the best thing is, has been this realization of how fast you can go. You know, I think about it where, for a lot of people in this job is what you make of it. You know what I mean? Like if you wanted to just kind of like tank it in, you could. People won't hold.
Did that happen in recent years here?
I'm just saying, you know. I mean, people like you can do it, and you could probably still be popular.
Oh.
I just think that the way that we have chosen to approach this work is we've got but so much time. So I can tell you right now, because I have a clock on my desk that counts off, that we've got 1,207 days left by the end of my first term. But that's the first term. I will be going back for a second term. But we've got 1,207 days left. I don't plan on wasting a single one of them. My team is not planning on wasting a single one of them. when you think about the opportunity that we have to shape a future and to create a state that those who came before us hope for and those who come after us that they deserve, who's got it better than us? And so I think that's been one of the beautiful things that we've been able to see, and it's been across party lines. You know, I've loved the fact that when you look at the initiatives we're pushing together, you know, we introduced 10 pieces of legislation in the last general session. Not only did we go 10 for 10 on all the bills that we passed, we went 10 for 10 bipartisan.
So it is possible.
Oh, it's not.
It's still possible for.
Maryland is leading the way. Maryland is showing that these phony divides that are being created are not real. Because when we're going out, I remember I went out to Lonaconing out in Western Maryland, and they were having a boil water advisory. They were having a water crisis. So this was the first official visit I took as governor. I went out to Lonaconing out in Western Maryland, and I met with the Mayor Coburn, who's become a friend, and he said to me, he's like, Governor, he said, do me a favor. He said, turn 360 degrees. So I turned 360 degrees. And he said, here's the only guarantee I can tell you. Everywhere you just looked, you didn't see a Democrat within 5 miles of anywhere you just looked. But he said, but I tell you what, you're the first governor that's been here since 1996. Show up. And I think that in this state, we're showing that, there's a way to depoliticize politics. That we don't have to give in to the phony labels or to the talking points. Focus on people's basic humanity. And I think whether you're talking about West Baltimore or Westminster, right? Whether you're talking about, Lonaconing, or whether you're talking about Princess Anne, or whether you're talking about wherever, Harford County, St. Mary's County, Cecil County, it doesn't matter. There's a basic humanity and simply an eye of just hoping to be seen that we're hoping for. And I think that we campaigned on the idea that we're going to do politics a little bit different. And I think I'm proud of the fact that we've been able to hold true to that and that the state's responding.
Thank you for showing up here and taking the questions today.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much, Governor Moore.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank y'all.
All right. Thank you.